This is going to be the talk. I wanted to just start, for those of you that don't know about Tamarack, Tamarack is an organization that exists in Waterloo, Ontario, and we actually are really intent on the co-generation of knowledge for social change. And as Barry mentioned, we've been working on poverty reduction as one of our priority areas at Tamarack for a number of years, and have really, for at least, I think, 12 years now, watched the progress of Vibrant Communities St. John move forward. They've been a vital part of the Vibrant Communities Initiative, and lots of lessons that have been learned here have been shared pretty intently across Canada. But we're also really interested in the work that's happening in St. John in the neighborhood revitalization and the priority neighborhood work. And so that's another area of focus for Vibrant Communities, or for Tamarack, called Deepening Community. And then our third area of focus is really for folks like yourselves in the room, anyone who is really interested in community change, to not have to always reinvent the wheel. We hope that you'll come to Tamarack and you'll R&D our website. You'll rip off and duplicate anything that you find on any of our websites and really use them in a way that will help you scale up your change or your priority areas very intentionally. So, collective impact. There are a couple of things that I want to kind of set the context for before we dive deeply into collective impact. There's lots of work happening in lots of communities, St. John and Fredericton and many communities across New Brunswick because of the Economic and Social Inclusion Network. There's lots of community change work that is happening, and we want to fully acknowledge that. And some of you might say when you hear, about collective impact, oh, we're doing that already, it's not really anything new. It is actually new. There are some elements of collective impact that I'll try to point out in my talk that make it unique as an approach. But I just want to acknowledge that there's lots of community change that's happening. There's networks, there's collaboration, there's asset-based development, there's neighborhood revitalization, there's community economic development. Collective impact is a framework that sits within this broader lens of these community change strategies. The second really important contextual thing that I think is critical to think about is when we talk about collaboration, in all of our minds, we have a different understanding of collaboration. So for some of us, we'll come to a collaborative table because that table has some money, and we're thinking if we're in the not-for-profit organization, and I've been there, because as Barry told you, I've worked in the nonprofits for a long time, we'll think, okay, so that group has some money over there, so I'm going to join that collaboration, just see how they got that money, and maybe I can position my not-for-profit in a way that we're going to get a little bit of the pie, right? And that's when we're at the table and we're competing. And I think in collaboration, we have to acknowledge that competition is part of a collaborative continuum or a collaborative spectrum, right? We're competing for people, we're competing for resources, we're competing for attention. We have to recognize this and we have to surface it. But across the spectrum, there are other elements of collaboration that we pay attention to. Sometimes we come and we're sharing information. Sometimes we come and we're actually now starting to more intentionally coordinate our activities, collaborate, and maybe even integrate. Collective impact sits at this end of the collaboration spectrum, in the red box, right? Where we are being more intentional about our activities. There's two things to think about, though, when we are actually in the red box of collective impact. Collaboration grows at the speed of trust. And so if we are really going to be intentionally coordinating our activities, working together, collaborating and integrating, we have to build trustful relationships across all these different partners in the room. We can't assume that, Barry's understanding of poverty is going to be the same as Monica's or the same as Karen's. We actually have to engage in honest and deep conversations with each other about what are those kind of deep-seated feelings that we have about this complex issue that we're trying to move the needle on, and then how do we build relationships. And so often in collaborative work, we dive into the agenda, but we don't spend time building relationships. And I think that you know, particularly as you lead into Living St. John work, and you heard from your co-chairs that this has been an 8-month process already. It was not only a process of research and conversation, but it was also a process of building trust amongst a lot of partners and engaging partners in a way that will really, you've got to go slow to go fast, right? That will really set the foundation and those relationships that will help you get to success. The third contextual issue is this idea of complexity, right? And complexity is interesting. Not every problem that we try to solve in our communities is a complex problem, but certainly in the 4 priority areas that have been identified in the Living St. John plan, they are complex problems. And some of the things about complex problems is that they are difficult to frame, that we each have a different understanding about the issue based on our role in the community and our lens, and also our own personal biases, right? So how we come to employment and thinking about employment opportunities is going to be different if you're an employer or if you're a person looking for a job. You're coming at that same issue, but you're coming from 2 different kinds of lenses, and you're framing, you know, the context differently. So it is complex. And we have to recognize that if we're trying to work in the area of community change, complexity is the domain in which we are working. It's also, at our table, we were talking about an initiative that's happening here in St. John, and one of the things that I heard at that table is, you know, despite the fact that we have this program that is having really positive results, each person coming to that program, their experience is unique. And when they leave that program, we can't assume that they're all going to follow the same path. And so that's another way of looking at this issue and really understanding that it is complex, that you're going to have lots of folks that, you know, you're trying to move the needle for in St. John, and they're going to have different experiences, they're going to have different frames of looking at the issue, but then their pathways are going to be different as well. So I think this slide is very helpful to kind of set collective impact in a bigger context, that complexity is challenging, and that's why we need all of you to be involved, right? Because all of you have a small slice of the solution. And it's the combination of all those small slices of the solution that we get the whole pie. So what is collective impact? For those of you that don't know about it, it occurs when organizations from different sectors, and this isn't just not nonprofit organizations. This is education, this is faith communities, this is business, this is nonprofit, this is government, organizations from all sectors come together, and they agree that they're going to solve social problems, that they're actually going to put their flag in the ground, and they're going to say, yes, we want to move the needle on this, and this is how we aim to do it. So that measure of success is really critical. When John Kania and Mark Kramer first wrote their article about collective impact in the winter of 2011, it appeared in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. In fact, the impetus of writing that article was they were asked by large foundations in the United States to look at the lay of the land in terms of how funding was happening and what were the results and impact of that funding. Because lots of money is going into communities. We know this from all sorts of sources, from business, from government, from foundations, from United Ways, from a whole variety of partners. And what they found largely falls into the category of isolated impact. That in fact, individual foundations were funding individual programs, and we were seeing results, but the results were, again, very individualized, right? We actually weren't seeing, and we heard this in the global TV clip, that despite all this work that we've been doing in poverty reduction in Canada over the last 25 years, we actually haven't moved the needle all that much on child poverty. Despite good economic times and bad economic times, it's been fairly flat. So that's what they found, and I think it's consistent in the United States and in Canada. But then when they started to dive a little bit more deeply, they said, but there's some interesting other examples that are happening out there. And they wrote about 2 of those examples in the initial paper, they wrote about Strive in Cincinnati, which is a cradle-to-career educational initiative, and they also wrote about the Elizabeth River Project, and the Elizabeth River Project is in New Jersey, and it's actually the turnaround of a toxic river. So this river was dead. There were no fish, there was no life growing, and a bunch of community partners, the university, the college came together, many community partners came together, and that river has been turned around as a result of this. The Strive initiative in Cincinnati in northern Kentucky is really a cradle-to-career educational initiative, and the big, hairy idea in Strive is that every child will be successful in and out of school, enter into college and university, graduate from college and university, and have a job in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky. Not unlike some of the priorities that you guys have identified here in St. John. And what they saw when they looked at Elizabeth River and at Strive was that progress was being made by these kind of cross-sector, multi-party, big collective impact initiatives. So we're seeing in Canada and the US that collective impact is happening now across a whole variety of sectors. It's not only in education or the environment. We're seeing it around teen pregnancy, around homelessness issues, around the environment, around economic development, and of course around poverty reduction. What does it take to get to collective impact? Well, many of these preconditions you already have paid attention to here in St. John. So there are three preconditions. One is influential champions. So certainly your co-chairs and many of the folks that are on the leadership team are some of those influential champions here in St. John. But you don't just want the influential champions. You actually want them to engage their spheres of influence. And so we heard Paulette talk about this property and how this property has been engaged in the poverty reduction work that's happening here in St. John. That's exactly what you want. You want the president of the college, the local college, to say, not only are we in, but we're going to think about how our college can change the way that we're working to actually contribute to the priorities. Or the local United Way, starting to say, our funding, maybe we can shift some of our funding priorities in such a way that it's going to make a difference. Or the local health center, thinking about, how do we do this? So that influential champion is critical, but the engagement of their sphere of influence is also equally critical. The second precondition is urgency around the issue. And we know that the research, the slide that we saw at the very beginning, that research is foundational to say, look, these issues, these four priorities are critical here in St. John, and we have lots of evidence that tells us that that is true. And then adequate resources. And adequate resources isn't only about money. It's also about the adequate human resources that are in the room and the leveraging of these human resources in a way that actually makes a difference. So resources and influential champions are tightly coupled together. There are, so we have the three preconditions, and then we have these 5 conditions. And John Kania would say that these are kind of broad scoping categories for you then to figure out, okay, so what will this look like here in St. John or in Hamilton or in Waterloo or in the hundreds and thousands of other places where collective impact is happening in Canada and the United States. So the 5 conditions, I'll go through them in a bit more detail, but they're about a common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communications, and a backbone infrastructure. And what's interesting is that collective impact, and this is what makes collective impact more than collaboration. It's the 5 conditions working together. You can't cherry pick them. You can't say, yes, we're going to have a common agenda, but not do measures. And you can't say, yes, we're going to have a backbone, but we're not actually going to focus on mutually reinforcing activities. It's all 5 of those conditions working together, and that's what makes it complex. Because not only are you working on a complex issue or on a series of complex issues like poverty and employment and education, because you guys have a big agenda that you've set forward here in St. John, but you've also got the complexity of all 5 of these conditions working in tandem with one another. It's also interesting to note that there are phases in collective impact. So I would say, I was talking with Monica and Kathy a couple of days ago, and I would say that where you are in St. John is a little bit in between phase 1 and 2 and starting to lean into 2 and 3. And it isn't that you actually get through one and you're complete and then you go into the next one. In fact, these are much more fluid. But it is, you have had that dialogue phase, and you've done a really, really good job here in the St. John area around the dialogue phase, and now you're ready to initiate action. And I think that's the purpose of today, is to actually start to now lean into these 4 priority areas and really think about, practically, what can I do as, you know, a representative of XYZ organization or a citizen in this community? What can I do to help this work advance? What's my commitment? Because we've heard of the commitment of the co-chairs, and we certainly know the commitment of the leadership team. What's all of our commitment to making this happen? So initiate action, then organize for impact, and sustain action. Oop, I went fast on that one. What's interesting about this is to think about, in each of the cases, you've got to pay attention. What's the governance structure? How are we going to measure our success? What are some of the community engagement pieces that we have to pay attention to, etc.? So let's talk about these 5 conditions of collective impact. The first is a common agenda. And a common agenda is saying, yes, you know, we're going to move forward with Living St. John, and here is the vision that we have for our community. So lots of the work has already been done around your common agenda. These are the core principles that should be in place for a common agenda, and I would have to say, you know, that the work here, it has been done very well. Some of the things to think about in terms of a common agenda, and I love this slide. They asked Francis Ford Coppola, you know, what's the difference between a good movie and a bad movie? And he said a good movie is when everybody makes the same movie. And that's what a common agenda is. That is saying to all of you, this is the movie we want to make about St. John, about living here in St. John, and are we all in this movie together? Or do you have a different movie rolling in your head? And you know, we all know that Francis Ford Coppola, he's made some good movies, but he's made some bad movies. So he's a little bit of an expert on this, right? So to think about, I love it because it actually for me is a very great visual about what collective impact is trying to accomplish. The second condition of collective impact is shared measurement. And we saw on this slide, and Paulette pointed out, the measures, the high-level measures that the group has already thought about. What we'll do this afternoon is we're going to dive a little bit deeper and say, okay, so what are some of the other measures that will help us show progress as well? So that's a little bit of the afternoon, but shared measurement is really important in collective impact because we say, we're going to hold each of us accountable. We're going to put our flag in the sand here, and we're going to hold each of us accountable, and we're going to report on the measures that we're achieving, and then we're going to try to make sense from them, right? Did that go the way we thought it would go, or what else happened over the course of time that impacted that measure in a positive and negative way? And that happens all the time, right? We've just come through a municipal election in Ontario, so there were new people elected as mayor, even though I'm not in Toronto, I'm actually in Hamilton, but you know, there's a new mayor in Toronto with a new priority and a new vision for the city. And so, you know, 6 months ago, your plan might have been going in one direction, and then when John Tory gets elected, your plan actually might go in it might speed up. So they were working on a poverty strategy in Toronto. And actually, when John Tory came into office, one of the first things he said was, I actually really believe that we need to work on this child poverty strategy. So lots of momentum had been put into place. Now it's going to speed up. So thinking about that, it's really thinking about, okay, so we have these measures in place of success. How are we going to not only look at the measures, but also look at some of the contributing factors to those measures? So when we think about shared measurement, and we'll dive into this a little bit, there are population level outcomes, and we saw those in your Living St. John slide, but there's also some interim measures, and this afternoon we're going to spend a bit more time talking about that. The third condition of collective impact is this idea of mutually reinforcing activity. This is, I think, a critical condition of collective impact. So we have 4 priority areas in St. John. We have beginning population level measures. The mutually reinforcing activities is about leveraging all the capacity that already exists here in St. John in a way that we're all working in tandem towards these 4 priority goals. So it's really saying, what is it that you're already doing that actually can help speed up and give you more momentum? And it's also about identifying gaps, because it's not, we can't assume that everything is being addressed, but sometimes when there is a gap, might be that a community agency or a business says, we were doing this over here, but it hasn't been quite as effective. We could move into this gap area and actually gain more momentum and more traction. So mutually reinforcing activities is a way of starting to think about intentionally, how do we contribute the work that we're doing in a way that is giving momentum to this work? Memphis Fast Forward. So I'm going to share with you one quick example. Memphis Fast Forward is not unlike what you're trying to do here in St. John. It's in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's actually a cross-community initiative. So it's not only just the city of Memphis, but it's also the Shelby County, which is just outside of the city of Memphis. And there's a link to a video, and I'm not going to show you the video, but it's a great video to take a look at. They actually have 5 priority areas that they are focused on. Again, not unlike what you're trying to do here in St. John. So they have People First, which is an education and talent priority. They have Operation Safe Communities. They have the Growth Alliance. They have Healthy Shelby, which is the Health and Wellness Alliance. And then they have this thing around government efficiency, which is really led by the mayors of both Shelby and the city of Memphis, and really looking at how can they more effectively operate government across these 2 layers of government. So this is an interesting kind of graphic. You can see there are 5 collective, sub-collective impact initiatives that happen within the broader Memphis Fast Forward, and then there is a backbone and leadership team that is trying to operate Memphis Fast Forward. They've been in operation as a collective impact initiative for about, I think it's about 5 years now. The example I'm going to show comes out of the People First collective impact initiative. And so People First, as you remember, is around education. So this is kind of their governance structure, not unlike what's happening here in St. John. They have a vision and strategy, they have action planning, they've moved forward on execution, and really have focused as well on building public will. So People First, as you can see, they have a structure and these intentionality anchors that are really driving their work forward. So that what they consider to be the intentionality anchors is really the 5 conditions of collective impact, right? And so they're really thinking through, for our People First priority, we're not only is Memphis Fast Forward a collective impact initiative, but this is a sub-initiative, and we're going to also use these conditions of collective impact to drive our work forward. They have 4 goals and 10 strategies, and one of their strategies under People First was really to increase college access for what they considered partial completers. And partial completers were people that started college but actually never completed it, right? And often these are folks that also have lower income jobs and also might be living in poverty in their community. They brought lots of different sectors around the table, and so they had the universities and the community colleges, business, the workforce investment administration, and that actually is a really important partner, as you'll see in this example. They had lots of local nonprofits and state agencies. What they found, the workforce investment administration, they found that there was this scholarship that was being administered statewide, and it was only previously targeted at high school graduates. And recently, as this workforce investment administration guide started to scan policy and program opportunities for the People First initiative, and he saw that there had been a change in legislation in the access to this scholarship money. And the change in legislation actually opened it from only being high school completers to also people that have been partially completed or entered into college and university. And so, you know, it was interesting that this legislation had changed, but nobody knew about it. And it was only when they were brought around, the partners were brought around the table and said, let's start looking at the policies that already exist and start to look at where there are both policy barriers and policy opportunities, that this policy opportunity actually they found. And then they started to say, so how could we, given the fact that we have lots of partners around the table, how could we more intentionally leverage this policy opportunity in a way that more people in Memphis and Shelby County can have access to this policy opportunity? And so the business partners around the table said, well, you know, what we could do as businesses is we could actually provide some tuition reimbursement. So, you know, we could help folks that are our employees currently to go back to school, pay for their tuition, and really get benefit as that. But we can also promote in our workplaces the fact that this scholarship opportunity is available. So for people that were feeling like, oh, I just need to finish my college and that will get me to that next level of job, they were also promoting it within their businesses. The Workforce Investment Agency or Association, they said, you know, we could actually figure out how to do some payments for the credit hours, or we could also look at the whole idea of promotion. And the university said, you know, maybe they don't have 12 credits, maybe they only have 10. Could we change our systems in such a way that we give credit for lived experience? And what would that look like? And that would get people from 10 credits to 12 credits. And so they started to look internally about how they could change their systems as well. The local nonprofit Graduate Memphis said, you know, we're really also going to promote this scholarship opportunity, but not only are we going to do that, we're going to monitor how many folks are actually going to take part in this opportunity and evaluate, you know, what it means for the individuals that are taking part in the opportunity. So are they, you know, is the fact that there is now this scholarship money available, is this actually attracting partial completers to complete college or university, or, you know, what else do we have to do in this priority area to really move them forward? And the state and agency, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, said, you know what, we need to get some feedback on this new amendment. And we need to know, is it working or not? So you can see how these two, how Graduate Memphis and the state agency actually were working in tandem. Because Graduate Memphis was actually looking at evaluation and able to give the state agency some really important feedback. What's really interesting in terms of collective impact, and there are examples in cities and towns right across Canada and the United States, and in fact, Vibrant Community St. John has lots of these examples as well. And I think that Vibrant Community St. John and some other work here in St. John is actually a little bit of the wind under the wings of Living St. John. But it really does say that when we bring lots of people together and they all have a small slice of that solution pie, that it's the combination of all of our knowledge and all of our experience, even the experience of people that are partial completers and some of the barriers that they're facing and the reasons why they didn't complete that college or university. It's that combination of knowledge and that combination of resources and leverage that we actually get to the real solutions that we need to, that actually begins to move that needle, right? Because that's the shared measurement needle. So collective impact is in many ways about changing behaviors. And that's hard for us because, you know, we are used to working in the same way that we've always worked. But we know that at the end of the day, our communities are not healthier, they're not more vibrant, they're facing lots of challenges. So we can't work any harder and we can't be any smarter, so we have to work differently. And that, I think, is the meta message in collective impact. So here is your path forward that we're hoping that all of you who've been part of this process already or are new to this process will say, yeah, you know, I think we can, as a community, really give momentum to this Living St. John agenda. We've been part of the discussion. We think it's important. We all have a vested interest in the success of St. John. We all do. Whether you're, you know, a resident here or you're from outside the community, what you're going to do here is actually going to be watched by, even by me in Canada. The fourth condition of collective impact is continuous communications, and you can imagine, you know, 4 priority areas, lots of people engaged. We have to talk to one another. It ties back into that turf and trust continuum, right? The collaboration spectrum. We have to talk to one another. We have to share our successes, but equally we have to share some of the challenges and some of the bumps that we hit along the road. So difficult issues are surfaced. And then the final condition of collective impact is this idea of a backbone. That there is a backbone infrastructure that is driving the work forward. And there are 6 roles that a backbone plays, and you can see those on the slide. But what's interesting about a backbone is that, you know, if you're building a house, they're kind of like the manager or the supervisor of the construction of a house, right? They're the ones that are saying, okay, I see these activities happening over here. Let's figure out how we can get them to be mutually reinforcing. And I see these measures happening over here, and what are we learning from those measures, and how do we share our successes? And I see this, you know, champion emerging over here. How do we bring that champion in? So it's really the backbone is the group that kind of stewards everything forward. They also critically look at policy and systems change. So they look at those policy barriers, because that's where we're going to get the most traction in collective impact is, you know, not that one individual is being challenged, but what is that policy issue that is actually preventing St. John as a whole community from getting, from achieving success? So what are some lessons about backbones? So FSG and the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, actually FSG, the folks that wrote the article about collective impact, that they're very much a research shop. And so they partnered with the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and they looked at the experiences of 6 backbones in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky. And this is what they heard when they interviewed business leaders, when they interviewed not-for-profit leaders, government leaders. They heard that the value of having a backbone is critical to the success of these community-wide change efforts, that it's critical to their success. And that they also play a fundamental role in the shared measurement and the continuous communication. So I only have a couple more minutes before your break. I've gone a little bit into your break time, and I apologize. I have one more slide. Who knows the story about bamboo? So bamboo is a very interesting plant. You can see the big root system at the bottom of this. It takes a long time for the root system to grow. And the root system actually, a lot of the growth of the bamboo actually starts at the root system. So for 6 or 8 months, you won't see any kind of plant. And then all of a sudden, the plant will surface, and it can grow, you know, a meter in a very short period of time. And so it's a really great metaphor for collective impact, because in fact, what has been happening here in St. John over the last number of months, and in fact I would say the last number of years, is that you've been growing this strong and interconnected root system, right? You've been going slow. You've been having serious conversations. You've been doing due diligence and your research, and you've been bringing partners to the table to really do this work. And now you're ready to shoot and grow in these 4 priority areas. That's what collective impact is about. But it requires these other things to think about it. It really does require persistent capital. But it's not financial capital. More importantly, it's human capital. It really requires all of you in the room to say, I'm in, and I'm going to help get this to, you know, grow as fast as it can. It actually does require this persistence over the longer term. That we're not going to solve these issues in a month, in 2 months, in a year. but we will have measures that will show that we're making progress, and we will hold ourselves accountable to those measures. It does also require this notion of aligning different funders across different sectors, right? So how can we bring the United Way, the Community Foundation, and government partners and business funders to the table to say, we all have a shared investment in this community. We know that already. We see that already, but in a way that is actually going to get us traction. And I think that, the sad news that I have for you all today is that there isn't a playbook. So we know that we have these 5 conditions, the 3 preconditions of collective impact and the 5 conditions, but St. John is different than Hamilton, is different than Toronto, is different than Fredericton. And so the work that is happening in St. John has to be built on your local context, right? On all of you in the room, on the people not in the room, on the opportunities that are being planned and the opportunities that might be projected for this community. And so the playbook will look different here in St. John, but we can learn lessons from you. And we can say, oh, that worked really well there. Can that be piloted in other communities? And so we are going to be watching as it unfolds here in St. John. But I think that, it is interesting to think about, okay, so we have this framework, this broad framework of collective impact. This is how we've agreed that we're going to be moving forward. Now let's do the work. As the chair of the Hamilton Roundtable used to say, Mark Chamberlain, he was a business leader, his famous quote that I love is, how much more research do we have to do to know that kids who are hungry can't learn? Let's roll up our sleeves and get to the work, which I think is a really great call to action. And this is Meg Wheatley's call to action for all of you. So with that, I'm going to send you off to, I guess I'm not. I'm going to invite Wendy up to do the next piece. But that gives you a broad frame about collective impact, and we'll dive in after the break. Wendy.